Hello, everyone, and welcome to Different Traditions of Indie Publishing at METATOPIA 2020. My name is Jason Pitre of Genesis of Legend Publishing, and I'm the person who's going to be annoyingly saying the system matters. Next in line, Darren, why don't you introduce yourself?
My name is Darren Watts. I am, I guess, most well known for formerly being the president and owner of Hero Games and publisher of Champions. I also used to own and was president of Indie Press Revolution. So I've kind of had a foot in both trad publishing and early story game publishing. I got out of the owning things business about 10 years ago and work pretty much only freelance now. Since then, I've worked on Star Trek, Doctor Who, and I'm currently working primarily for Greater Than Games.
Fiona.
Oh, God, sorry. Hi, I'm Fiona of Geist. I'm mostly known for working on Mothership, and I'm a purchasing officer for Exalted Funeral, so I look for independent games to buy wholesale for a storefront. If you are interested in doing that, you should contact me in some way, usually on Twitter, where I'm at Coiling Oracle, and I promise that, I'm not as horrible as my Twitter seems.
Oh my god. I'm Viditya. I am an indie publisher. Wait, one second. So I released a bunch of my games on itch, and I've also done work on various indie Kickstarters, writing for them, and that's a lot. That's a lot of me.
Wonderful. So the core question of this panel is, what is indie, and what are the different sort of schools and generations and hashtags associated with the various sub-communities of indie publishing? Because we all come at it from similar but different places, with different communities and different expectations. So we're going to go at this roughly chronologically. So let's start off with Darren.
Okay.
What is your indie?
My indie is it's not a genre of games at all. In fact, it covers a wide genre of games, and it's always kind of a personal bugaboo of mine when people use it to mean story games or something like that, right? Because from a from like a financial, from a business perspective, literally everybody who is not D&D or maybe Pathfinder and maybe one or two other companies occasionally is effectively indie. Right? I mean, by the standards that you would use for indie film or indie music or indie comics or something like that, the idea that if the company is owned internally, is not a corporate, kind of like master, but the people who are doing the creating are the owners and managers of the property, that they are the ones who benefit from the work, who profit from the work, and that there is not a kind of traditional means of distribution that is entirely successful for what they do, right? That kind of definition of indie, like I said, pretty much includes, by population, 99.9% of our quote-unquote industry, right? So I try to always separate... Yeah, what's that?
Who is not indie?
Who is not indie, right? D&D is not indie, right? Once again, by this definition... indie, D&D is not indie. Pathfinder probably is not indie. You could make a pretty good argument that maybe Vampire isn't, something that's got the size to have. If you've got a marketing department, then you're probably really not indie, If you've got a marketing person, some of us manage to actually, get one person in there. But if you've got more than one person doing your marketing, you're probably not indie. But like I said, it's more of a style, right? That's more of indie is how things get sold, how things get made and sold, not a genre of design, not a genre of the way that a game actually works. Any kind of game design can fit under the umbrella of indie. And so I always try to have people kind of be more definitive than just using the term of I'm an indie designer, right? Like, or this is an indie game. There's a lot more that I want to know about that. The term itself is too vague to be useful, except when you are describing how it's processed and how it's sold as a product. So, trad fits within indie, OSR fits within indie, story games fit within indie, lyric games fit within indie. I mean, these are all just different ways. There's a lot more information that you need beyond the one word to really know anything about a game.
Mhm.
Right. So there's always the edge cases of, like, how about Monty Cook?
Mm-hmm.
How
Right.
about
Well,
Darren?
yeah. At their heights, right? There are a number of companies that you could kind of like move up depending on where you want to cut that line, where the edge case is, right?
Chaosium.
Yeah.
Mhm.
At its height, Hero Games had 8 employees, right? Was that big
Rick's
enough
got a
to not
video
be
game.
indie? Sure. Champion's got a video game. We didn't have, we waved at it as it went by. We didn't make it ourselves, but
Mhm.
so once again, that's just a question of like where you draw that line, and anybody can draw that line for their own purposes anywhere they want to.
Mhm.
It's tough to argue. Most other industries will laugh at you if you say that a company is a big company because it's got 10 employees. Right?
Yeah.
Within the game industry, having 10 employees means you're a big deal, a big power wielding operation.
Yeah, so my personal definition of indie, like on that side, like within the big envelope, is do you have multiple salaried employees?
Right. Yeah.
Mhm.
That's like I said. Then in that
Well,
case,
hell,
okay. Then you like
one-
drop that line a little. Yeah.
If you have one person who can make their living on,
Like I said, at its height,
producing
Hero had
games.
8. What the biggest it ever was, we had 8 salaried employees for it, and by a lot of people's standards, that made us a huge company.
Mhm.
Yeah,
Was Green Running has 4 right now, right? I mean, and then several part-time people.
Hmm.
So
yeah.
Oh.
The scale is hilarious, and sometimes because can I earn as much as McDonald's as a McDonald's
yeah.
worker? Is seriously, are you in the big time or not?
Right.
Yeah.
The one way that we used to break it, and I don't want to take up space from everybody else here for it, but one way that it used to be broken was when we would talk to Fred Hicks, that whether or not Evil Hat had outgrown its indie, kind of like trappings, right? Like its indie beginnings, and the argument was made to Fred that if Alliance floors your product, you're not indie anymore. Right, like that was literally the definition, of do real distributors take you seriously?
Huh.
And treat you like a serious company. And then, when Dresden Files kind of like fell off and Evil Hat's sales, kind of like dropped down a level again for this, it's like, could you return to being indie for, you were like not indie for 6 months and then you were again suddenly? I mean, it's a weird term to use definitionally. So.
Yeah, definitely. So, I'm speaking from sort of the next generation. I started with the late Forge period, and I dug back into the early catalog because I wanted to learn game design. So I was in the Forge to StoryGames.com era.
Right.
Both of which had a lot of problems. Innovations as well. Like, there was a lot of good that came out of them and a lot of bad. There was a lot of lot.
Sure.
So a lot of the story games, things that are now currently labeled as Forge games or story games, up to and including the Powered by the Apocalypse games, all came from that tradition. And some of the key elements that sort of define the tradition is this is the first wave of, hey, you can print on demand. You don't need to get a second mortgage on your house to do an offset print run of 10,000 books. Look,
Right.
PDFs are a thing. You can sell them. Look, you can design games that are about things, not just how can we reskin D&D, except it's cyberpunk.
Right.
Like it was
I didn't come here to be insulted.
I'm just saying.
I know,
You don't
this is Jason and I have had this
inherently
argument for
need to
10 years.
have elves in your cyberpunk.
Yes.
It's not a 100% requirement. So yeah, we came out of that tradition and saying things like, "Oh, you say that this game is about storytelling. Where do you tell stories?" So that's some of the history coming behind it. So we were
there was I think in that time there was a big embracing of that kind of like DIY ethos for it, right?
Yep.
That the same kind of thing that happened with punk, right? Of we are trying to cut out the middleman between us and the customer, right? That like we're going directly to them, right? Our sales are by hand. Our sales are on this new thing we call the internet, and we don't need any middlemen, any buyers or anything to like stand between us and our customers. Which, like I said, the music industry went through in the 70s. That they did it 25 years before we did. So
we also jumped headfirst into Kickstarter first.
Yep.
We were like, "Oh my god, this is good. Yes, jump now." So we were all there. Like a lot of us were there on day one because it was. We were used to, okay, can we manage to get a print-on-demand print run with 2 pieces of art? Okay. Wait, you mean we can get money ahead of time for this? Sweet, let's make games. And let's make weird games, weird for the time. Games like My Life with Master, which is a game that has a defined end period. Or a game like Bacchanal, where you don't actually really have rules for violence so much as you have rules for sex. Like, there was, or the Romance Trilogy, which was amazing.
Sure.
Like, it was a lot of
Shooting the Moon. Absolutely, it was Shooting the Moon was the first indie game I think I ever bought. So
yeah, so that's sort of my section of the tradition. So I think next in line is Fiona.
Yeah, I came out of RPGs from other weird things, so I sort of didn't endear myself in the OSR insofar as I said it wasn't real, because there's no one that's written a Dogma 95 document explaining how you make a product and prove that it's OSR, because, like, I can go download Lars von Trier's shooting guide, and I can say that Lars von Trier cheated it by, covering a window to make artificial lighting to make a shot better. But, I can at least say that, the overwhelming spirit of this law was followed, because there's not really anything that ever linked a lot of these things together. Like, there were trad games, and there were people that were doing weird art stuff with very minimal rules, and there were things that look like, to talk about people that I don't work for and explicitly try to do that. I think Nightmares Underneath is a good example of a game that had a lot of different systems and was trying to do something interesting, and got called OSR, or Paulo Greco when they did Chthonic Codex, which is sad wizard gay grad school where you wander around looking for herbs and probably your advisor gets you killed. Is very different from the sort of tent pole of that around the Ennies with Lamentations, who was an early adopter of high quality production runs, and engaging in extremely baiting behavior and using negative marketing, and I could do an endless list of things that they did wrong, and I think everyone's well aware of them. But they also figured out that making a nicer looking book sometimes got people to buy the book who wouldn't buy it otherwise, and then that became kind of a race between the justification of selling a $50 book and making a $50 book, of questions of function and form, of how can I play this? And, I'm interested in a lot of the independent movements that sort of are people trying to do stuff. Oh, sorry, I thought I was talking over you. Yeah, so I, am mostly interested in things like production side questions of How do you pay an artist equitably? What is a good working relationship to have with people? How do you make playtesting become something that's not done because you fuck a SR when, like, you know, for business reasons, they fired all of their playtesters essentially and hired, you know, people that were doing paid by the word writing to do writing and editing on the grounds that, like, it kind of works like a movie script and kind of doesn't. Which is why I think people should read old things. You know, like Deadlands had a fucking celebrity endorsement. Bruce Campbell wrote a personal endorsement for the fucking book in the intro. I forgot if this is a conference where I can swear. I'm sorry. I am like a classless.
I think we established we're PG-13. So now that you've used up our swear, the rest of us can't do it.
I'm so sorry. I am the swear authoritarian, but I'm gonna pass this before I screw up even further.
The good news is we can have as much violence as we want, though.
Yeah, violence is acceptable.
Yeah. So.
Well, I if you're passing it on, so my I've been publishing games by myself for about 2 years now, I guess. I'm about to hit 2 years, so like I'm pretty new to the scene, which is really fun. But I have like a degree in game design, so like me coming into the indie like RPG scene and game design is not like from nowhere. Like I've spent years like leading up to this and like working on this, so it's I think there's like I mention this mostly because I think there's like an interesting trend that I'm seeing that now like game design as a professional avenue like from higher education is becoming a thing that's more and more common, that I feel like all of y'all or like not like anything, but like, you know, it's like it just wasn't a thing.
It wasn't available to us.
No, yeah, exactly. So
dude, if I could have taken a game design course in college, I absolutely would have in the 80s. But you know, it was
So
not a
like Gary Gygax could have talked down to you about making Gary Gygax's vision wrong.
He did that anyway. He did that anyway. We just did that.
You could have paid for it though.
Right, I know. Paid for it exactly.
Spent way too much money for that. But so that's why I want to mention that's like a whole new avenue of like coming into design and publishing and stuff like that. Especially as like, and then I basically treat myself as a freelancer who also just has their own web store and is able to push out my stuff. Like kind of like an artist. I like to think about like this kind of era is we're all artists in like an artist like collective is the word I was looking for. Yeah, so like, and then I specifically when I was like leaving college and was like, okay, I want to start like putting my work online and like figuring out how to get my stuff out there. I kind of shopped around at different stores and storefronts, and I chose Itch because it seemed like the most accessible. And so that's kind of like where that happened. And I joined around the time of like the big Itch boom that occurred. And so that's, I guess, at least like my, like how I started to think about it. And so like, I'm still kind of thinking about like what I consider indie that you asked before. And it's weird. Like I feel like I'm in a weird place because the definition of it is so outside of like it just kind of like seems to have occurred like way before I did. So I was like, well, I'm an indie designer because I guess I am, right? Like I'm or like
right.
or it's more like I know indie when I see it. It's the same thing with art, right? Where it's like, I know art when I see it. It's like, I know indie when I see it. So there is, and it does shift in weird ways, but like, I feel like my definition of it changes maybe based on my mood a little too much, but also like, but also definitely is like, oh, I have like, I'm like, you know, like a bunch of Itch people are like, like, you know, weird solo designers and stuff like that. Or we collaborate every once in a while and things like that. But then I like think about like Chaosium and things like that, and or like White Wolf, and I'm like, or even like Monty Cook, like you mentioned those, and I'm like, I don't know anymore. You know, like I guess.
Right. Well, once again, it depends on what you're using the word for, I think, right? Like, are you talking about how the thing is sold? If you're talking about how it's made, I hate using indie. If you're talking about how it's sold and how it's talked about, distributed, then I think it's got to use.
There's like distribution is like a whole other thing that I've had to think about and like figure out like moving forward and stuff like that. Yeah. Like what it means to like work with a publisher and stuff like that is still a whole like it's like a whole other spectrum because like I no longer have, or I guess like me, but I'm talking about my era or whatever.
Sure.
It's just like it's very easy to just be like, well, I've made a thing and here you go. Like it's out there and I can and there's a good chance of it being seen or bought or whatever, right? The the landscape's a little different.
Yeah, I think that's part of why I focus so much on labor issues, right? Is it's something I can quantify, right?
Sure.
Like I can say this person pays freelancers a living wage, this person doesn't pay freelancers a living wage, or like this person provides equity, right? Like this person is providing royalties to artists or is not using a contract that involves signing over all of their rights in perpetuity or is paying them for reprints. And like I know that like talking about money is always unpopular because it makes people say that you're greedy. But my counterpoint is it's possibly greedier to give people a lopsided contract they don't understand and then take money that they theoretically are entitled to under most standard issue contracts, which is, you know, how I draw that line. And also, I think, you know, pushes into the thing I don't know how to qualify as indie or not is sort of the contemporary equivalent of a Unity asset flip, right? Like, many people are independent designers on Steam. Many people are independent designers on Steam because they buy an asset kit and they make a sandbox and using pre-generated elements that someone else made in a sandbox that they kind of created, they say that like, this is, you know, my work. And then you can kind of ask questions like, well, how much of this is your work or what is a generic work or what does make indie? And, you know, I think that sometimes helps because you could start qualifying it as like, well, it'll also lead you into writing endless lore, right? To try to make things perfect.
I'm really kind of curious. I want to go back to a thing that you mentioned earlier, Fiona, which was that when you were talking about how Lars von Trier had made Dogma 95 and had kind of, you know, like hard-coded his understandings and his expectations for it, you know, like if you want to be part of this movement, this is what you have to kind of like, you know, buy into, right? And it's interesting to me that I have seen, you know, like several locations relatively recently and largely through like the itch.io format for this of like groups of designers who are doing that same sort of thing, right? Who have kind of like adopted that out of the art world, out of the film world and everything and applying that. And I think that's awesome that like we've brought that over for it, right? But the idea that like the, you know, the lyric games community has like their kind of like a, you know, not really a manifesto, but kind of their list of things. And then I literally just before this panel was reading the Sword Dream list, right, kind of thing for it, the very kind of like specific, which is fabulous. You know, I'm delighted to see that. And to the extent that we didn't have that, you know, that kind of like organization, or, you know, Jason and I can both, you know, refer back to the closest we had to that was the Forge, right? Was the fact that we had gone through this discussion and had kind of like basically all agreed for now, you know, for the time to use Ron's words, you know, and use Ron's definitions and fight about Ron's definitions basically meant that there was at least a physical place. And that was a breakthrough. As somebody who, you know, was doing this before the Forge can say, you know, like at the time that was a huge change for us, right? Like to see that happening as an artistic movement, right? To kind of like recognize this as something other than hack work. So
you're
hang on, you're muted, Jason.
You're muted, Jason.
Yeah, having terminology of any
Jason,
kind.
you're muted.
Yeah. Right, exactly. We didn't, you know, none of that existed when we were doing it, right?
Like,
so
what is currency?
Right.
What is a scene?
What's agency? Right. Yeah.
What is agency? Like, these are things that did not exist prior to the emergence of the Forge.
Right.
So we were all just.
Well, I mean,
like,
obviously they did. We just talked about it really badly because we did not agree what we were talking about. We all kind of understood the ideas, but we didn't have the vocabulary. You know.
So in Call of Cthulhu, these are your brain hit points.
Right. Right. Yes. Right, or I mean, like once again, I don't want
Okay,
to. I don't want
but-
to diminish what, for example, what Paul did with his. But I mean, when you talk about story games beginning with My Life with Master, my hackles go up because I'm kind of like Amber Diceless would like to have a word with you, over here, right? So I mean, there's that you can't ever kind of like just pick one person and say this is where something started, right? There's always like an influence behind them, or things.
And I would actually argue that the first game that we could posthumously welcome into the story games fold was actually Traveler.
Sure. Yeah.
Real
Because
quick, I just want to check. Fiona, are you frozen? No. Okay, there you are. You were kind of roboting for a second.
I sit still like a robot. Don't worry.
Oh, good. I just wanted to make sure.
The screens on here do occasionally freeze for a little bit, but it usually you can I haven't seen the audio break, but the video occasionally holds up for a bit. So
sorry.
So the reason why I'm saying Traveler
No, it's fine.
is because of, just for the audience who might not be aware of it, Traveler is notorious for the game where you can die in character creation.
Mm-hmm.
There's a real good reason for it. It's actually a game about the Vietnam War.
right.
It's a game where you go into military service, and if you came out, you're likely disabled, desperately poor, trying to make your way. You've learned some skills, but not the right skills for a life outside of the military service. There's the Travelers Aid Society as a core asset you can get. You can get charity for a
Exactly. You can
a veterans organization.
Mhm.
So
once again, if your definition of a story game is it includes a cool, interesting central metaphor that not everybody grasped, then you can define them a lot of different ways. I mean, I think most people would put Traveler still kind of solidly in the trad tradition, if only because it is so immersion centered kind of thing, right? And does not kind of give you much of an opportunity to step outside your character to affect a story.
I mean, arguably, Tecumel, look, it was an entire system of science fantasy, and including a dying world that was made without reference to Occidental histories. None of the language groups are Occidental, none of the history is Occidental. M.A.R. Baker is, to be clear, a linguistics scholar who is a white Muslim convert, but he definitely tried to use history of groups he knew a lot about to make a very weird world, and no one really enjoyed it very much because they had to learn a lot and understand the other cultures. So everyone fucking hates that.
Yeah, but the people who did, boy, the people for whom it hit hard. So
yeah, it's great. I'm a strong supporter of that as an early indie, even though it was sold by TSR, but TSR set up a financial arrangement so that it was actually against the interests of comic stores and stuff to stock it, which is maybe a good example of what is indie is. People with professional access are trying to not help you succeed.
Yeah.
Okay.
And that's
and I
pretty
see
good.
Tecumel as actually, I see Tecumel as a precursor to the OSR community. It's a no, we're going to take your basic foundation and we're going to take a radically different approach. We're going we'll take the same core mechanical bits, but we're going to take it for a wild ride that's very different from your standard expectations.
Right. That's an interesting connection. I had not made that one before, but I like that. Yeah.
Yeah, there's no horses, there's just hippos.
Right.
And because there's hippos, forms of slavery, because they need porters everywhere, and no free person will walk for miles carrying pounds of stuff, and therefore the country is incredibly draconian. And it's also because hippos are hard to domesticate, and also there's not a lot of wood. So there's reasons for every horrible thing there, and they're naturalistic, and they can get into questions of was this appropriate, but it's the second role-playing game. It's at least, I think, very interesting that way. Sorry.
As a remix of somebody else's rule set, though, for it, it's kind of an interesting look for it. It doesn't have. I mean, what it's missing from the OSR is that kind of like fruitful void of we're intentionally not making rules to cover things that we know are going to come up in the game because we want you to, to the extent that the OSR is purposeful about that, right? So, and not everybody in the OSR is. So, I'm hesitant to make a sweeping step about that, but
Viditya, what would you think might be a precursor to the modern itch style game?
I'm trying to
have
think
a
about
theory.
that. I really think about that a lot because I feel like this is more personal, and I know this isn't for everybody on itch, but it's like there is, I think, a well, actually, I think this has to do with a lot of, say, like Sword Dream, which became like became a good like set of principles for a lot of itch designers. Is kind of screw categorization to a degree,
sure,
and also like decentralize. It's this idea of like, well, itch is not a place where like an ideology is discussed. It is a place where ideas are shared in a way, or a codified, I guess is the word. It's not like where an ideology is codified. It is just a place where ideas are shared, and so like because of that, I think like the precursor to the itch games is almost like this is all like interesting, and like we should, and like there is a big like, okay, well, because I can kind of just put anything out there, and it's very easy to do that. It's like I'm going to slap together a small hack, like a sketch basically, or like an idea, a design, and throw it out there. It's less like this one thing kind of led towards a greater like movement, and more like we or me and other people are like, well, all of this existed, and like how do we kind of break it up, you know what I mean?
right,
Not
yeah,
like, cause like, so I think it's like there's a bunch of baggage to game design. Do we need it all, or like do each of us need to be carrying it all the time, I think is a more better way to put it. How does that sound?
yeah. No, I like that. And that's a reflection of the lowering or destruction of the barriers to entry that have traditionally existed in this as an art form, right? I mean, it was you could create all you wanted, but nobody could see your creations unless you had access to the audience.
Exactly. Yeah.
That was not available until like a series of things had to happen, most notably the internet first, as somebody who remembers what it was like doing this before the internet, right? So and then like each step that along the way, that was kind of like a new barrier to entry falling, that allowed more people from more backgrounds with a more like kind of like diverse collection of experiences could come together and just like find their own audiences, right? Like you couldn't find an audience for your product if you weren't willing to do a 10,000 copy hard copy print run, in 1994, right? There was just no other way to actually access that.
Yeah.
And so we are only just now, I think, coming to grips with the changes that our art form has been made available to us, right? In doing that. And that's part of what's so exciting to me as an old-timey designer, to see these kind of like movements and these locations happen and open up around us. I couldn't be that since those barriers have never been lower, it's never been more exciting to see what's coming in, right? It's absolutely gives me life, to like see all this cool stuff happening.
I know like a lot of Southeast Asian designers, like the whole RPGC movement is able to thrive and converse because of like like, oh, this is like there is the barrier so low, because they're like, hey, like now we don't need to worry about like finding groups or whatever. It's like now coexist in a way, and other like international people, I see like other international groups and designers who maybe aren't as comprehensive as RPGC coming out. And
Sure. Well, Jason brought his entire collection of French designers to
Yeah.
Metatopia, as a group.
Yeah.
We've got a cohort coming from here at Metatopia from Mexico City.
Mhm.
We have an entire set of people from Scotland. I mean, there's we're bounced
It's cool,
all over the place. It's very exciting. Once again, it's
Mhm.
it sucks that we're not able to do this show in person like we usually do, but making lemonade out of the lemons that we got from this, it's great that we've been able to open up this show in particular to such a global operation, right? Like it's
Exactly, yeah.
okay, we can't all get you to New Jersey, but we are going to introduce you, American audience, to some really awesome shit that's going on down in in the Philippines, right? And it's
Mhm.
let's at least do that. So
And I actually think we can unpack some of that. So
Mhm.
as time progressed, the geographic scope of the designer community seems to be increasing as well.
yes.
So, like a lot of these games literally started through direct viral transmission from Lake Geneva.
Mhm.
And the early designers were pretty much all American, with the exception of like Games Workshop and a few things that sort of spilled out there.
Mhm.
And it started
Games
to.
Workshop were the bitter employees.
We lost
Sorry?
you there,
The
Fiona.
most
Yeah, you're
important part of game design is when you run White Dwarf and you're supposed to write a positive review. Oh,
Wait. Like in the rules, it's like, hey,
I hate everything. Am I coming in?
you're,
In
No,
your
it was just that.
yeah, you were scattered there for a minute.
it was just for a second.
Oh, just Games Workshop also continues the, have your kind of party organ papers shut down by TSR for writing a negative review, and then write Games Workshop's like entire sort of like piss poor fantasy world as like a bitter ex-employee thing at your former boss.
Sure.
Which is, the grand tradition of game design is your bitter ex-employees become the next indie.
Spite is an amazing motivator. Absolutely true. Always has
So
been.
there's actually a hilarious story in the book Designers and Dragons, which everyone should check out. It's currently published by Evil Hat.
Right.
And
Shannon is the bomb. Absolutely.
Yeah, it's about the initial interaction between TSR and Games Workshop. Both of them were pretending that they were these big businesses and were sending them out of their basements or garages.
Yep.
So it was literally like Games Workshop, because they wanted to. I think it was like in a workshop.
Yeah.
Or something along those lines. Like
Absolutely.
they wanted to make it sound like they were a real big thing, so that they could get licensing and sell D&D.
Mhm.
Right.
Like, yeah, no. Since day one,
Yeah.
everyone's been indie.
It was
Function.
hard to get polyhedrals in
Yeah.
the UK for a long time.
Really?
Oh yeah, absolutely.
Oh, I didn't
Well,
know that.
I mean,
Absolutely.
polyhedrals were invented.
Yeah,
Ooh,
they
yeah.
existed. They were for hobby stores and stuff. So
Not all of them.
wow.
That's the thing. The first polyhedrals were oh god, what's his name? You know, the creator of the Zed something.
Bluzaki.
Yeah.
Yes,
Right, Bluzaki, but his first customers that made it actually worth it, his time to actually go into large production of them, were model trains. So
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah, so yeah, there's a lot of stuff on the early side of things that are quite interesting. So I think the other thing is there's also been a diversification of what kinds of games are acceptable.
Mhm.
Because I think it's safe to say that Darren's Indie produced a wide variety of very interesting 8.5 by 11 books.
Yes. Sure, fair.
Yeah.
The Story Games crew innovated and got the 6 by 9, and we have PDFs.
Mhm.
OSR, I think, was the first one
Published
that really
my
went-
first
so-
PDF product I published was in 2002. Yeah.
Wow.
So
like, I think zines literally started off from the OSR, and a
Really?
lot of other similar.
Self-promotion.
well, again, once again,
Mixam.
zines were rediscovered by the
Yeah.
OSR for it. Zines being a thing that existed in the 70s. You know, like out of comics and art movements. So
I mean,
But
in the
they
90s.
were commercialized. They were used
Sure.
as a accepted commercial practice of producing games in that.
right, exactly. They were taken seriously as art, which
And
our
they were not
original
taken
generation of them
seriously-
were not.
They were
So-
not taken seriously in the story games generation.
Right.
And now, digital only is a thing that exists.
Mm-hmm.
And the idea of, I'm sorry, no, this game is never going to be actually physically produced. It's just going to be a digital PDF.
Right.
Have fun.
Yeah.
That was unrecognizable from where we were.
Huh.
Absolutely, and once again, it's beautiful. It should be,
Yeah.
right? And it's great that we are taking full advantage of those changes, of the technological change, of the cultural change that has gone with that to advance the art, right? Or to, expand the art, right? In some cases, that advancement of the art or that expansion of the art means taking a step back and looking at older material with a new eye, or looking at influences from other art forms or whatever, and kind of, like figuring out how to, gaming in general is such an acquisitive genre, right, that it can accommodate all of these different things and bring in pieces of it. For example, my favorite of those currently is lyric games.
Mhm.
Is the idea that, like this is a game that is about not about a story, not about a character, but about a moment, right? Like, but about about an idea, a feeling, a concept, like whatever it is, to have this kind of as like lyric instead of epic, right? Like as a term for poetry, right? Basically has allowed the gaming movement around it to kind of like readopt shit that Yoko Ono was talking about 50 years ago, right? I mean, that's wonderful that that's happening, right? Like this, that we've got room for that now,
Yeah. I think like that's something like talking about like the evolution of what the medium can do is what genuinely excites me. And like if I can do anything to say like for indie publishing is like I think now is the time that you can really do whatever you want. Like it's a fun time to explore and break it, especially because of like again like like the various platforms now kind of let you do that. Like games like this Discord has ghosts in it. Is a role playing game.
Sure.
That can only exist on a Discord server, right? Like it is designed to be played there. Similarly, like I guess again to buff up itch a little bit, but like because it was initially a digital games platform, it has like HTML integration, and I know like people run Twine games on there or like run generators and stuff, right? So it's like, hey, it's a game that like now has a little bit of digital integration. That's like cool. And like so this like evolution of the games that are able to be published, or maybe not able to be published, because I feel like all of these games have been being made. It's just now is like
they can find an audience.
They can find an audience is like a thing, right?
Well, the thing is, PDFs literally started at a certain point in time.
Oh yeah, like
Sure, right.
There are actual technological hurdles that you could not have made a PDF game
before 1998, 99 or whatever.
I guess like the difference is like I've talked to maybe well, it's more like I've talked to game designers who or just other artists. Like I went to an art school, and so like I would talk to like illustrators or animators or sculptors and stuff like that, and they would like they would introduce interaction into their work. And I would tell them they made a game, and they're like, "Oh, I didn't really think about that."
Right.
You know what I mean? And like so that's why I think it's like maybe even it is kind of I think like it's like a little like dangerous to say this started here when or I guess the language should shift a little bit, where it's like it became something that the public, that like the industry recognized,
Yes.
rather than it didn't exist until. Right?
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah,
Yeah.
I think that is absolutely the right distinction. It
Mhm.
became normalized at this point in time.
Yeah.
Right. Exactly.
Um,
You could trace back roots, and people like Shannon doing that are, like a delight and joy to the industry forever.
Mhm.
But those roots still are, they're not the plant, right? Like there's a flower on top of those roots, and let's
Bunnies
make
and
sure we kind of
burrows.
pay attention to that. So
Mhm.
Bunnies and Burrows is a thing.
sure.
Bunnies and Bros is a
Like,
great
I
game.
did a
That
panel
is-
last night where Ken said the first lyric game ever was Call of Cthulhu, and that started a fabulous 10-minute argument about that like
Oh,
the moment of insanity or whatever is like the key goal of Call of Cthulhu, right? Like the moment of like encountering the numinous is in fact actually like the core conceit of Call of Cthulhu, and we were all just like, blah. And then immediately started arguing about it, right? Which is exactly what you want from that kind of like high horse pronouncement, And it's like, I'm not even sure I believe this, but let's argue about it anyway, So
Well, it's like you could just do a hack where negative sanity isn't going mad; it's just attaining gnosis into the fact that the elder gods are right. And
Right,
there, I just
exactly.
made it into cult, and also made it go on longer.
Well, also
Mhm.
you
Yep.
made it into what's the name of Graham Walmsley's game?
Which one?
The Cthulhu game where it's like a very simple like
Oh,
one
the Cthulhu Dark or whatever that is.
Cthulhu Dark,
Yeah.
yeah.
Yeah, right.
Oh.
It's literally that.
Right, yeah. Just making
Yeah.
Cthulhu into a pure story game, right? But I love the
Mhm.
idea that like he'd gone beyond story game, that specifically into lyric, right? Like that this is This is a game about a moment, and everything that you do in the rest of the game is
Yeah.
to create that moment. So
The thing that I love doing is looking at it. So there is always a spectrum from most traditional to most indie and innovative. And I love that the most innovative line just keeps on running over time, and it just keeps getting farther and farther.
Right.
The point when I realized, oh, I'm static and I'm at like the middle of the spectrum. Wow. Was when I read A Real Game by Orabel, which
I'm not
is
familiar with that one.
So won the Indie Groundbreaker Award the first year as Game of the Year, because it is I don't know if it's a 1-player or a 0-player game, but you are role-playing as a role-playing game that has imposter syndrome. And it's saying, am I a real game? Cut holes in me, put me over another game. Am I better now? And it's like, you are literally role-playing as a role-playing game with, in an existential crisis.
I went somewhere around that once.
Right? Yeah, fascinating. I don't remember another one.
That's weird. That's weird for me. That's awesome. Keep going weird. More of that, please.
I'm gonna take this moment to check in with our with our home base here and see, because I can't see any questions on this. Jason, have you got the question line there?
I don't see many questions right now, other than the obvious Itch Squad and a lot of the enthusiasm. A lot of the I don't think what they were saying is correct.
Oh yeah, well,
it's fair.
Well, we're not supposed to.
I'm always wrong. That's actually like the best point is largely I'm probably wrong-headed, easily confused, and prone to magical thinking, which is why I can do okay in like RPGs, but like it's not a good way to make a like truth statement. Jesus fucking Christ.
This sort of panel is only for high horses that we can like throw pronouncements down from, right? Like I mean, this is not,
I mean, I'm always right, so that's
right. Yeah, exactly.
This is why I made.
So do please feel free to argue with us. But if you have a specific question or something that you would like us to argue about in the next 5 or 10 minutes, this is probably your shot to do that, audience. So.
I mean, this is why I made a game that's just an argument with the user. Like,
great.
Yeah, go get 100%. Discourse, and then just go try and figure out whether or not I made a game, and then yell at me.
It's good. It's very good.
Well, excellent. We got one. So can
Okay.
you give one sentence that summarizes everything you've said in the last 45 minutes?
Oh,
And
jeez.
actually, more importantly, I think as we do this, it would be great for us to share what are some of the most interesting elements of our respective traditions and what we're seeing on the horizon.
Okay.
So, Darren, what do you think? What's some of the most interesting work in your lump of the hobby?
My lump of the hobby right now. That's interesting. Most of what trad. I mean, it's very difficult to find a trad game, a new trad game that has not, on some level, kind of like adapted to the local environment, right? That like story game concepts and like art game concepts have trickled. I don't know, left on the spectrum, right? I don't want to say down, but they've trickled across. To the point where a game that is like pure trad, the only pure trad games anymore are either kind of like knowing OSR twists on D&D, or are I mean, like when D&D starts doing a thing, does that mean it becomes trad, right? Like at that point, has it like it's been kind of like folded into the structure, right? I mean, most trad games these days at least include something, some story affecting mechanic, something that kind of like breaks the traditional immersion and allows a player to influence the world in a way other than an action by their character, right? Like the trad definition originally was, like I am inhabiting a character, I am immersed in a character, and this is what I do. Right, and everybody else at the game is playing their characters, and then we have a GM or a DM who is, like creating a world for us to interact with, and then story is just an emergent property, right? Like if we all play our characters interestingly and well, a story will happen, right? And we weren't supposed to pay attention to the story having any kind of like narrative weight or interest or literary merit on its own. And we have pretty much abandoned that idea, right? Like the idea that like breaking immersion is bad is almost been beaten out of trad games to at this point. There is like always some step in the game where you step back and say, it would be really interesting if this happened. It would be really interesting. It would make a better story if we had this interaction. I, the GM, am sharing some level of like world building or storytelling responsibility with the players. It's not all just on one person, right? Like there's almost no trad games left that do that anymore. So I think there is, like the interesting thing is like how close we are to. I mean, there's so much crossover between these different kind of like schools right now that it almost feels like at some point, like storytelling and trad may eventually kind of like merge, right? And then there will be these cool things out on the fringes, out on the edges that are like still innovating and doing new things. But what we think of that division is increasingly kind of disappearing between the two.
I mean, all you have to do is have D&D say story rules matter.
Right.
And then we just vaporize.
Even Hero has story points now, right? I mean, even Champions, uses story points now. That's not, that would have been unthinkable 30 years ago, right?
So on my end, I think there's a lot of interesting. So we've always been super interested in divisions of GM authority. GM list, GM full, all sorts of fun stuff there. And I think asymmetric games, specifically things like Kingdom or Downfall or the like, I think those are super interesting. And I think that there's going to be a lot of really interesting development that comes out of that wing of story game 4G development.
Sure.
Fiona.
God, I like go through things in my head and I have like a long list, and I'm like, okay, I need to compress this into like 1 minute. So I'll say innovations in the OSR that people didn't pay attention to. Michael Raston's Guilds of Infinigrad, which I think is just a beautifully designed document for generating guilds in what is very much like a biopunk influenced semi-industrial contemporary. And I'll also throw out Logan Knight doing Sleeping Palace of the Feathered Swine. One, Logan does really good psychosexual dungeons, and I don't think enough people do psychosexual dungeons, despite the fact that, Bluebeard's Bride is a psychosexual dungeon crawl. It is literally, in many ways, an extremely trad game. There's not even a lot of rooms in the dungeon. You could stat it for BX if you really wanted to and just make this weird. But I think because it accounts for distance, it has a very noirish plot with trying to harvest parasites from sleeping owlbears. There's body horror. There's armor that touches you. He's also got a thing that will release someday that has all sorts of weird things in it that I appreciate. These are obviously things for adults. Please do not give this to a child, or give Bluebeard's Bride to a child and don't blame me. I think that there's a lot of experimental design going on. I think watching people yell at Jared Sinclair is a good way of figuring out what's going on in design, because there's usually a different thing people are yelling at him.
Yeah.
And I think that the empty hex map in Anti-Sisyphus is actually deserves an Emmy. So there, I said something nice about another person.
Very nice.
All right, I'll be quick, and I'll just kind of rattle off a bunch of designers again. So I think the wonderful thing that's kind of moving, and somebody asked a question, was what do you think? What do you see on the horizon? So I'm gonna take that moving forward. Is if you want to see some really fun innovation, there's Adira Slattery does really incredible lyric game work, and also dips into just various other wonderful design ethoses. Similarly, Taylor Lebrecht of Riverhouse Games. I think Taylor has an incredible brain for design and actively breaks down what people think are codified rules, and then are just what so these are great designers to just kind of get you thinking. You also want to check out the RPGC people, specifically people like Pam, the Dove Taylor, Mahar makes incredible games. Similarly, if you read Mahar's work, it's a lot like reading just a manifesto, but you're it's also a game. There's incredible other incredible designers that I'm trying to remember. I had them in my brain. I should have written them down.
You can always throw stuff up on the on the boards here or in the Discord, right?
You could also just throw up.
Don't drop the idea because Twitter, you can't think of it now, right? If there's somebody you want to, if there's somebody whose stuff you want to pimp, please feel free to do it on the Discord.
Yeah, I'll definitely do it in the Discord, because I think the other one I did remember another thing though. There's other wonderful POC designers that you should just kind of keep an eye out for. I think you have Simon Moody is an incredible designer who really kind of understands what it means to hack a system and make it interesting and talk about social commentary, especially POC issues. And so there's people like this that I think is widely available now because of the itch scene and stuff like that you can go and check out. Trans designers, POC designers, people outside of the US are very accessible on itch right now.
Fantastic. So why don't we just go around and let people know where they can throw money our way, so we can recycle the same money within the community,
right?
And more games.
Hand that $5 bill around again.
Exactly. So my name is Jason Pitre, Genesis of Legend Publishing at Genesis of Legend. I'm on DriveThru, Itch, and you can always sacrifice money in my name. Darren.
Okay, so if you want to reach me personally, especially if you want to hire me for work, you can reach me on Facebook, Darren Watts, or on Twitter at Darren Watts 27. If you specifically want to talk to me about conventions and that sort of thing, you can reach me at Darren at Dexposure, particularly for this con, but also for the other ones that I run or co-run. And let's see here. If you want to, toss me some cash currently on what it is that I'm working for, you can come listen to Explain This Comics Guys, the podcast that I am currently running at explainthis.podbean.com.
Oh, great. I'm Fiona Maeve Geist. You can find me on Twitter at Quailing Oracle, where I will probably be more or less hostile than you think I should be because I'm bad at reading rooms. If you have an independent game and you do not have distribution, well, not distribution, sorry, wholesaling, you should talk to me because I'm a purchasing agent and I would like to have more creative games. If you would like to support me financially, what you should do is buy more diversely in games so a market exists for more diverse games. Literally, just try games that do not appeal to you in the sense of they aren't things that you're familiar with or involve ideas that you're not familiar with. Because, like, I guarantee it'll change everything else you do, even if you never run the game, and that's in itself worth it. There's been my bit where people will use words involving social justice to describe me, and that's perfectly fine. I'm gonna stop now while I'm ahead.
You can find me. You can find my work at vidityavoleti.itch.io. You can also support me on Patreon at patreon.com/vidityavoleti. I don't know. I also stream on Twitch. I do a lot of fun things on Twitch. Actually, that has to do with this is like trying to figure out what the medium of live streaming could do for game design and like creating a game design like community. So like would do window shopping. I did like a live design game show at one point that I really want to bring back. So yeah, I'd say like check that out. That's kind of it.
Well, thanks to all for this lively discussion, and I look forward to more discussions and more cross-pollination. And can I just turn my answer to Fiona's, because that was badass. Buy weird games. With that,
fair cop. This is true. Yeah.
Yeah.
Thank you all for coming.
Thank you.
Have a nice evening. Yell at me on Twitter.